Miles Vincent had never felt cold like this before. He had been aboard the scout vessel Avalon, an agile but small spacecraft designed for deep space surveying, when a sudden malfunction hurled him straight into the atmosphere of Borealis. One moment, he was scanning mineral deposits on the planet's surface from a safe orbit. The next, he was in a free fall. Racing alarms shrieked in his ears, accompanied by the pilot console's frantic blinking. He fought with the unresponsive controls, trying to tilt the ship into some semblance of a stable angle so the hull might survive re-entry. The Avalon, battered and sputtering, plummeted through the howling sky, eventually slamming into a massive, windswept glacier. When he finally came to, he was in darkness. The sky beyond the forward viewport was shrouded in perpetual dusk, faintly illuminated by the weak white sun that lingered behind horizon-scraping clouds. His breath caught in his throat as he tried to unstrap from the pilot's seat. A pounding in his chest told him he was still alive, though every fiber in his body ached. He was bruised, perhaps a cracked rib or two, but the battered hull had held enough to keep him from total disintegration. He checked the onboard computer. It flickered weakly, but the readings were clear enough. Oxygen levels were stable, and the temperature outside was minus 50 degrees Celsius, at least. The atmospheric pressure was close to that of Earth, though the composition contained slightly elevated concentrations of argon and neon. It might be possible to breathe Borealis's air with a filter, though not for long durations. The immediate question was how to survive the long night that lay ahead. The planet was tidally locked to its star, meaning that most of the hemisphere was in perpetual twilight or darkness. The meager sunlight that occasionally kissed the horizon gave no real warmth. Without power, the inside of the Avalon would become a tomb within hours. Yet, Miles was not one to give up easily. During his years in service with the Frontier Exploratory Corps, he had endured the extremes of desert worlds and boiling jungles. He had learned that luck favored the persistent, so he rummaged around for emergency supplies and found a functioning portable heater, a solar blanket, and a few days' worth of ration packs. The ship's hull had cracked in places, letting in the bitter wind that seeped through the small fractures like icy claws. He donned his thickest thermal suit, adjusting the seal around his neck. The visor's integrated heads-up display flickered with readings, external temperature plunging drastically, wind speeds approaching gale force. He'd need a better shelter than a crash-landed spacecraft perched precariously on the edge of a chasm. Could the ship's sensors help him locate a nearby cave or ice formation? Possibly. But the sensor array was heavily damaged. He might have to scout on foot. Stepping outside, he was assaulted by the wind's ferocity. He hunched over against the gale, feeling his exposed cheeks go numb within seconds. The snow was not pure white, but carried a bluish sheen, reflecting the alien sky overhead. Somewhere in that vast, icy expanse, he had to find refuge. With each step, his boots crunched through layers of frost that had accumulated over millennia. The air was thin, yet somehow pungent with unidentifiable elements. After nearly an hour of slow progress, the unrelenting cold drove him to near exhaustion. Finally, he spotted a narrow fissure in a cluster of ice-sculpted spires. It resembled a natural formation, perhaps a crevasse that had widened over time. Mustering the last of his energy, he shuffled toward it. Inside the fissure, the howling wind muffled to a distant moan. He took a moment to catch his breath, using his flashlight to survey the interior. The cave seemed to descend deeper under the ice, revealing smooth walls with intricate whorls and patterns. The temperature was marginally better, but not by much. His portable heater would make all the difference here. He set it up, watched the faint glow as it began to dispel the frigid gloom. As the day's adrenaline wore off, his mind wandered to the bigger question: would rescue ever come? The Avalon had been on a remote expedition. He was far from any standard trade routes or colonial outposts. If help was inbound, it could be weeks or even months away. And with the damage to his ship's comm system, he wasn't sure anyone would even receive his distress call. For now, he focused on surviving the next hour. Then the next day. Little did Miles know that in the endless tundra of Borealis, someone else was already aware of his presence. A faint silhouette against the swirling white storms watched his every move, waiting, deciding. Morning was a relative concept on Borealis. The sun never truly rose in a blaze of full daylight, but rather skimmed the horizon with a half-hearted glow. Miles awoke to the hiss of his portable heater. His visor's temperature gauge read -30 inside the cave. A small improvement, but still dangerously cold. At least it wasn't -50. Feeling the pangs of hunger, he tore open a ration pack and chewed on a synthetic protein bar that tasted like chalk dust. His eyes wandered around the dimly lit cave, noticing for the first time what looked like claw marks etched into the ice walls. At first, he dismissed them as natural formations. But upon closer inspection, they appeared too deliberate, too evenly spaced to be random. Something had carved this place long before he arrived. He heard a distant scraping sound, like metal on ice. His head snapped toward the mouth of the cave, heart pounding. Could it be a rescue drone? Or maybe local wildlife? On a planet like Borealis, any life form would be adapted to extreme cold, possibly larger or more resilient than what he might expect. He snatched his plasma pistol from his belt. Although his shot supply was limited, he wasn't about to face an unknown threat unarmed. Peering around the corner, he saw something moving across the tundra, outside dark, angular, and unnervingly silent except for the faint scraping that carried on the wind. It moved with an uncanny precision, almost gliding across the surface. As his eyes adjusted, he realized it was a metallic contraption, some kind of autonomous machine. Its design was reminiscent of a predatory beast, 4 spindly legs ending in sharp points, a torso shaped like a segmented shell, and a sensor array that swiveled like a head. Every now and then, it paused, scanning, perhaps searching for something. He held his breath, wondering if it was searching for him. The hunter machine emitted a narrow beam of light, sweeping the snow. Then, as if it had found a clue, it shifted direction toward the crash site of the Avalon, which was partially visible in the distance. Slowly, methodically, it scuttled away until it vanished amid the swirling flurries. Miles exhaled with relief. Whatever that thing was, it seemed formidable, designed for terrain as punishing as Borealis. The question haunted him. Was it hunting him, or merely investigating an unfamiliar disturbance? Determined to gain more information, he decided to make a trek back to his ship. Perhaps there were salvageable parts or tools he had missed. He gathered his meager equipment and ventured out, wary of the mechanical predator. The wind slapped him again, but he pressed on. The journey took longer this time, as he stuck to wind, sculpted ridges, and ice outcroppings for cover. His footprints from the day before were already gone, erased by the restless storms. Eventually, he reached the twisted remains of the Avalon. The hull's upper half was caved in, but the cargo hold was still intact. As he pried open a warped panel, he felt a rush of near-freezing air brush past him. Inside, he found a few essential items: an extra power cell for the heater, a portable water purifier, and the remnants of a comm relay that might be repairable. As he worked to free the relay from the wreckage, he sensed movement behind him. He froze, the hair on his neck standing on end. Turning slowly, he caught a glimpse of a large shape lurking behind a drift of snow-laden debris. It was not the metallic hunter. This figure had fur a deep charcoal color with a faint silvery sheen. It moved on 2 digitigrade legs, yet its silhouette resembled something bestial. Through the swirling haze, he locked eyes with it. They were an intense, lupine gold. For a fleeting moment, neither moved. Then, in a burst of speed, the creature vanished into the whiteout, leaving only faint paw-like footprints in the snow. Startled, Miles hesitated before following, but the storm thickened, blotting out any trace of the figure. Not wanting to push his luck, he hurried to collect whatever supplies he could. On his way out, he found a half-collapsed stasis locker that still contained a single flare gun. It wasn't much, but it might come in handy if his pistol ran out of charges. loaded with as many supplies as he could carry. He made his way back to the cave. Thoughts churned in his mind. First a mechanical hunter, now a strange wolf-like being. Was Borealis home to warring factions, creatures forged by evolution to survive the freezing wastes, and machines designed to track intruders? By the time he reached his small sanctuary, his limbs were quaking with fatigue. The heater's small red glow offered a welcome reprieve. He set down his bundle, rummaging for anything that might help him repair the comm relay. Hours slipped by as he carefully connected severed wires, tested circuits, and coaxed some semblance of life into the device. At best, it could send a weak distress signal. At worst, it might do nothing at all. Still, he tried. He tried because giving up meant death in this place, and he wasn't ready to die yet. For the next 2 days, Miles barely left the cave. He rationed his supply of protein bars and sipped melted snow filtered through the purifier. Every now and then, he tested the comm relay, but only static greeted him. Outside, the wind howled mercilessly. Once or twice, he glimpsed the shape of the mechanical hunter patrolling the icy expanse, always distant, yet somehow uncomfortably near. His mind kept drifting to that wolf-like figure, though bestial in appearance. Its posture had been almost humanoid, standing upright. If there was an intelligent species on Borealis, why had no records mentioned it? The planet was officially charted as barren, with only minimal life signs at the microbial level. And yet, the claw marks in this cave. The tracks he had seen all pointed to a native presence. On the 3rd day, desperation drove him outside again. He needed to look for any additional resources, perhaps small wildlife or cave fauna that could supplement his dwindling supplies. He also wanted to see if he could find traces of that mysterious creature again. He traveled in a different direction this time, away from the crash site, skirting around deep crevasses that yawned like the jaws of hidden beasts. The swirling snow eventually led him to a rocky outcrop where the ice was thinner. Cautiously, he ventured forward, scanning the horizon for the metal hunter. So far, it was nowhere to be seen. That was when he heard a rumbling growl, soft yet menacing. He whirled around, pistol raised. Emerging from behind a jagged slab of ice was the wolf-like being, fur bristling, eyes focused. Now that he could see her more clearly, he noticed she was taller than him, maybe by a head, with broad shoulders and powerful limbs. Her muzzle was elongated, lined with pointed teeth. Yet, her stance, partially crouched, suggested curiosity as much as threat. They stared at each other for a long moment. Miles kept his weapon at the ready, uncertain of the creature's intent. Slowly, she lifted a clawed hand, palm facing outward. A universal gesture, I mean no harm. His breath caught, and he lowered his pistol slightly, though not entirely. She took a cautious step forward, then another. He could see her exhaling puffs of steam in the cold air, her golden eyes never leaving his. Then, she spoke, perhaps not in words, but in guttural syllables and growls that conveyed a sense of intelligence, of language. He shook his head, unable to understand her meaning. In response, she tapped her chest and made a soft sound that might have been her name, Rhea. That was how it sounded to his ears, at least, Rhea. In turn, he tapped his own chest. Miles, he said, the word disappearing in the wind. When he saw her ears twitch, he repeated it more slowly. Miles. She tilted her head, attempting the sound. It came out as a low rumble, me-less. It was enough for a first introduction. They stood there, both tense but not hostile. Finally, Miles lifted his free hand and pointed at the swirling sky, then at himself, trying to mime his crash. Rhea watched, ears perked, as if struggling to piece together his meaning. Then she nodded, stepping closer, sniffing the air around him. He sensed that she was examining his scent, or perhaps verifying he was unarmed aside from the pistol. Their uneasy truce was shattered by a piercing screech that echoed across the tundra. Miles spun, spotting a reflection of metal in the distance, the mechanical hunter, scuttling over an icy ridge. It had found them, or at least was heading their way. In an instant, Rhea let out a sharp bark, She motioned for Miles to follow as she bounded off into the snow. His survival instincts overrode any hesitation. He sprinted after her, adrenaline pumping, each breath burning in the frigid air. The terrain was unforgiving, with hidden pitfalls beneath the snow's surface. Still, Rhea moved gracefully, barely slowing, as if she knew exactly where to step. The mechanical hunter gained ground, its metallic legs clacking against the ice. Through the swirling white, Miles caught glimpses of glowing red sensors and the gleam of sharp edges that could slash through flesh and bone. He pushed himself harder, determined not to fall behind. Rhea angled toward a massive ice formation that rose like a frozen fortress. A network of caverns and tunnels riddled its base. She darted into one, beckoning Miles to follow. Once inside, they wound through twisting corridors, the walls sparkling under the faint glow of his flashlight. The sound of metal scraping grew louder, echoing off the crystalline walls. Eventually, they emerged into a larger chamber, its ceiling studded with icicles that glimmered like deadly stalactites. Rhea paused, scanning the area. At the far end lay another tunnel exit. She jerked her muzzle toward it, indicating they should keep moving. But the moment they headed for it, the mechanical hunter appeared at the tunnel's mouth, a dark, angular silhouette that blocked their path. Its sensor array locked onto them, and with a screech, it charged. Miles cursed, aiming his pistol. Rhea bared her fangs, letting out a fierce growl. Together, they braced to stand their ground, an unlikely alliance forged in the frozen shadows of Borealis. The mechanical hunter lunged forward, its spindly legs digging into the ice. Miles squeezed the trigger, sending a bright bolt of plasma lancing across the chamber. The shot seared a line across the machine's armored torso, but did little real damage. With a screech, it retaliated, a razor-sharp appendage slicing through the air. He dove aside, narrowly avoiding dismemberment. Rhea snarled and dashed in from the flank. Her claws scraped against the metal plating, and she raked at the joints connecting the hunter's legs to its body. Sparks flew, but the machine's design seemed hardened against such attacks. It twisted with inhuman speed, sending a backhanded blow that caught her shoulder. She tumbled across the icy floor, letting out a pained yelp. Seizing the moment, Miles fired another shot, this time aiming for the sensor array perched atop the metallic beast. The bolt grazed it, disrupting the machine's vision. That bought them a second of reprieve. Rhea rolled back onto her feet with fluid agility, her teeth bared in determined fury. "Over here!" Miles shouted, waving his arm to draw the hunter's focus. The machine whirled, allowing Rhea to rush behind it once again. Together, they harried it from both sides, forcing it to divide its attention. Twice, the creature's limbs lashed out, missing them by mere inches. Its screech, an unholy blend of grinding metal and electronic wail, reverberated painfully in the enclosed space. Miles felt his heart pounding, sweat freezing against his brow. If the machine cornered them, it was over. Desperate, he scanned the chamber. Above them, the ice-laden ceiling bristled with dagger-like icicles. An idea sparked in his mind. A well-placed shot could bring some of those icicles crashing down. "Rhea!" he yelled, though it was unlikely she understood his words. He pointed upward, then mimed shooting. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then darted aside, giving him a clear line, summoning what was left of his resolve. Miles aimed his pistol at the ceiling. He fired twice, the blasts melting through the brittle ice. A thunderous crack echoed, and a portion of the ceiling collapsed, sending massive shards raining down upon the hunter. The machine tried to dodge, but the confined space gave it little room. Several icicles impaled its thoracic plating, skewering vital components. It thrashed, sparks and fluid spewing in all directions. One final screech tore from its speakers before it collapsed in a twisted heap, shuddering spasmodically. For a moment, neither Miles nor Rhea moved. Then cautiously, Miles approached the wreckage, pistol at the ready. The hunter lay in ruin, its limbs twitching like a dying insect. Satisfied it was disabled, He backed away. Rhea emerged from the shadows, chest heaving, her golden eyes still aflame with adrenaline. Their shared victory felt surreal. Here he was, a stranded human on an icy alien world, teaming up with a wolf like being to defeat a mechanical predator. He realized his legs were shaking both from the fight and from the lethal cold that seeped in once more. Now that the adrenaline rush began to fade, Rhea touched her injured shoulder, wincing. Crimson blood matted her fur. Without thinking, Miles approached, hands raised in a gesture of concern. She regarded him warily. He pointed at her wound, then at himself, trying to convey an offer of help. After a tense moment, she nodded. Working quickly, he retrieved a small medkit from his belt. The universal disinfectant was safe for most known species, though he had no idea if it would react negatively with her biology. Carefully, he applied it to the wound. Rhea winced but didn't pull away. Then he wrapped a bandage around her arm as best he could, the bright white gauze stark against her dark fur. When he finished, she pressed a hand to his chest in an oddly gentle gesture. As though acknowledging his kindness, he gave a tentative smile. The cold reminded him of their vulnerability. They needed to find better shelter, perhaps deeper in this network of tunnels, or risk freezing to death. They set off down the passage, using his flashlight to guide the way. The walls glittered with crystalline ice, and the path dipped steadily downward. The temperature dropped further, and the wind no longer howled, replaced by a deep, resonant silence. Occasionally, Rhea paused, sniffing the air or listening intently, as if she could sense threats far beyond his human perception. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a vast subterranean cavern. Glowing crystals, some kind of bioluminescent growth, or perhaps a rare mineral lined the walls. The soft, ethereal light revealed ancient pillars carved from stone, half buried in ice. Miles gaped, realizing they were standing amid the ruins of a lost structure. What civilization could have built such architecture beneath the ice? He turned to Rhea, who gazed upon the sight with something akin to reverence or sorrow. It dawned on him that she might be tied to this place, that her people might once have inhabited these halls. The magnitude of his ignorance weighed on him. He knew next to nothing about Borealis, let alone the history etched into its frozen depths. She motioned for him to follow, leading him deeper into the cavern. The glow from the crystals intensified, illuminating what appeared to be a central chamber. Massive reliefs were carved into the walls, depicting stylized creatures that resembled her kind wolf-like beings in tribal attire. Some brandished spears or stood around large bonfires, while others bowed before towering, mechanical effigies. The imagery sent a chill down Miles's spine. The mechanical effigies bore an uncanny resemblance to the hunter they had just destroyed. Was there a war between Rhea's ancestors and a race of machines that had once dwelled here? Or had they worshipped the machines? Whatever the truth, it was locked in the planet's icy grip. But for the moment, he had at least one ally, a living being who shared his struggle for survival. For the first time since crashing, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps together, they could find a way out of this frozen nightmare. In the heart of the cavern, Miles and Rhea found a small alcove that offered some natural insulation from the bitter cold. The walls were smoother here, as though carved deliberately. A few shards of the glowing crystals dotted the rocky surface, bathing the space in soft, pale illumination. By now, Miles's exhaustion was palpable. His limbs felt heavy, and every breath seemed to draw in frigid daggers of air. Rhea also trembled, clutching her bandaged shoulder. Despite the resilience of her species, the cold took its toll. They needed warmth urgently. Miles had an emergency thermal blanket and a portable heater with one spare power cell. He set the heater in the alcove's center, activating it with a barely audible hum. The temperature rose only a few degrees, but in this environment, even a small increase was life-saving. They huddled close to the heater, shoulders nearly touching. Rhea sniffed at the device, then turned her curious gaze on Miles. He realized that although they had formed a fragile alliance, they were still strangers in almost every sense. How could they communicate beyond gestures and cautious glances? He pointed at himself again. Miles, he repeated. Then he attempted to mimic her name, Rhea. With the guttural growl he'd heard earlier, she tilted her head, nodding once. It was a start. Next, he tapped the floor, then made a swirling motion with his hand to indicate the planet's icy surface. Borealis, he said. Rhea watched him. She uttered a series of low growls and clicks, possibly referencing the planet's name in her own tongue. It sounded far more complex than anything he could replicate. Communication by drawing might be easier. He rummaged in his pack, pulling out a small notepad and a graphite stick. On the first page, he sketched a rough silhouette of his ship, then a figure representing himself falling from the sky. Rhea studied his drawing intently, occasionally making soft, murmuring sounds. Then she took the graphite from him gingerly, as if unsure how to hold it, and attempted to replicate the lines. Her claws made it difficult, but she managed a few jagged strokes. They passed the graphite back and forth. Miles attempted to draw the mechanical hunter, but his artistry was rudimentary at best. Rhea, however, seemed to grasp his intent. She circled the image of the machine and drew a symbol next to it, an angular shape that might have been her people's shorthand for danger or enemy. Then she tapped her chest, then his, drawing a line that connected them both to the symbol. They shared a common adversary. As they worked, the heater's gentle warmth seeped into their bones, granting a slight reprieve from the unending chill. Miles couldn't help but notice how her fur glistened under the crystal light, each strand capturing the faint luminescence. Though her features were wolf-like ears, muzzle, fangs, there was an undeniable grace and intelligence to her eyes. Once, while she was absorbed in drawing, he spotted a faint scar on her forearm. He wondered about her past, about the battles she might have fought in this hostile world. She was clearly a survivor, just like him. Eventually, fatigue overwhelmed them. They took turns dozing, with one keeping watch while the other rested. Miles dreamed of swirling snowstorms and flickering flames, of mechanical beasts roaming the wastes. But in those dreams, he was never alone. A tall, lupine figure accompanied him, their footsteps side by side across the ice. When he awoke, Rhea was crouched at the alcove's entrance, staring into the cavern's depths. She glanced at him, her ears alert. Something had drawn her attention. Without a sound, he joined her. Through the dim glow, he saw strange shapes at the far side of the chamber, hulking statues of canid figures, carved from stone or perhaps metal encased in ice. Their faces were obscured by centuries of frost. He sensed that these statues mattered to her. Maybe they were monuments to her ancestors. She led him closer, letting him witness their silent grandeur. One statue bore an inscription in an alien script, worn by time. He traced the faint symbols with a gloved finger, wondering what they might say. A name, a warning, a story. Rhea stood beside him, her expression solemn. She placed a hand on the statue's surface, as if communing with the spirits of her forebears. The moment held a quiet reverence, a connection to history that transcended species. He felt an odd mixture of awe and humility. He was an outsider, stumbling upon a legacy that spanned who knew how many centuries. Suddenly, a clattering echo reverberated through the cavern, snapping them both to alertness. Could it be another hunter? They exchanged a glance, tension coiling in their muscles. Rhea gently grabbed Miles's arm and pulled him into the shadows behind a partially collapsed pillar. There they waited, hearts pounding. A silhouette appeared, illuminated by the crystal glow. It was smaller than the hunter they had fought, but still clearly mechanical, a drone of some kind. Drifting a few feet above the ground, a single red sensor pulsed like a searching eye. It hovered near the statues, scanning them with a thin laser beam. Miles clenched his teeth. If the drone was scouting, it might report their position to more machines. Rhea bared her teeth in a soundless snarl, her claws flexing against the cold stone floor. The drone, however, soon drifted away into another passage, seeming more interested in the ancient carvings than in their presence. That was a small relief, but also a reminder that more mechanical threats lurked in these depths. When it was gone, Rhea let out a slow exhale, and Miles realized his own breath had been held far too long. They retreated to their alcove, mindful that time was against them. The battery on his heater would only last so long. Food and water were finite. They had to find a more sustainable refuge or a way to contact his people, preferably both. In a low, determined voice, Miles muttered the word that had become his mantra, survive, and Rhea, despite not understanding the language, seemed to echo that resolve in her eyes. Over the next few days, Miles and Rhea made forays into the cavern's deeper recesses, searching for clues about the place's history and any resources that might help them endure the hostile environment. They moved carefully, mindful of the roaming drones that appeared sporadically, scanning walls, statues, and corridors with their unwavering red eyes. The ruins were extensive, what looked like an entire city encased beneath the ice. Buildings hewn from stone jutted from frozen corridors, their doorways blocked by centuries of frost. In places where the ice had melted or shifted, they found chambers filled with more statues and carvings, each depicting the wolf-like race in various poses of worship, conflict, or daily life. Some showed them forging tools, others depicted them in gatherings around mechanical constructs. Miles gleaned that once there might have been a symbiosis between the organic and the mechanical on Borealis. Whether it was a partnership or something more ominous, he couldn't be sure. But given the hostility of the hunter and the scouting drones, he suspected a cataclysmic breakdown of that partnership had occurred. They discovered sealed metal doors, too, embedded in the rock. Rhea seemed uneasy around these doors, her ears pinned back and a low growl rumbling in her throat whenever they drew near. She seemed to associate them with danger or sorrow each time. Miles also felt an inexplicable dread emanating from within, as if ancient ghosts stirred behind the walls. On one expedition, they found a partially collapsed chamber where a large control panel lay encased in ice. Broken monitors, frayed wires, and shattered data nodes littered the floor, hoping to salvage something useful. Miles spent hours chipping away the ice, painstakingly extracting small components. He pocketed anything that looked like it could integrate with his damaged comm relay. Meanwhile, Rhea stood guard, occasionally sniffing at the air or listening for approaching drones. Whenever her ears perked and her stance tensed, Miles froze, turning off any tools he was using to avoid detection. They would huddle in a corner, breath steaming in the cold, until the danger passed. Progress was slow. The battery in his heater was draining alarmingly fast, forcing them to ration its use. They slept huddled under the thermal blanket, each sharing body warmth. Initially, Miles felt awkward, uncertain if Rhea would even tolerate such proximity. But she seemed to understand the necessity on Borealis. Survival took precedence over personal space. One evening, after a particularly grueling exploration, they returned to their alcove with a small haul of salvage. Miles carefully spread out the pieces, a few circuit boards, a cracked display, random connectors, and a power cell of unknown charge. Rhea watched, her luminous eyes tracking each component. He fiddled with the power cell, pressing a switch to see if it held any energy. A faint blue glow flickered, then died out. Disappointed, he set it aside. Then he turned his attention to one of the boards, surprised to see markings similar to those on his comm relay. Could the technology once used by the inhabitants of Borealis share some universal standards with human tech? That seemed unlikely but not impossible. Using his multi-tool, he pried open a panel on the relay. He was no engineer, but he had enough practical knowledge from his time in the Frontier Exploratory Corps to attempt basic repairs. If he could just get a low-powered distress beacon working, it might reach any passing ship within range, or at least ping the emergency frequency of the Corps. Rhea crouched beside him, occasionally pointing at a piece of salvage with a questioning grunt. He tried to explain in gestures how each component might fit together. It was cumbersome, but her curiosity was evident. She even handed him tools at times, anticipating what he needed next. As they worked, a subtle warmth kindled between them, far different from the mechanical heat of the battered portable heater. It was a sense of companionship, a fragile bond formed under duress. Miles found himself glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking, noting the intricacies of her fur pattern, the intelligence behind her eyes, and the gentleness of her touch, despite her formidable claws. But he also sensed a lingering sorrow in her. Occasionally, her gaze would wander to the carved murals depicting her kind, and a haunted look would cross her face. He wondered what she had lost: family, a tribe, an entire civilization. He could only guess. Finally, he managed to cobble together a rudimentary circuit for the comm relay, connecting it to a small power source. The device lit up with a feeble glow, emitting a faint whine that startled them both. With a hopeful grin, Miles adjusted the frequency to the standard distress band. Nothing but static. Still, it was a tiny victory. The device was functioning, albeit poorly. He pressed a transmit key, speaking slowly and clearly, "Mayday. This is Miles Vincent of the Frontier Exploratory Corps, stranded on planet Borealis. If anyone can hear this, please respond. Coordinates unknown. Environment hostile. Request immediate evacuation." He repeated the message 3 times, then he switched the device to standby mode, preserving the meager power. Rhea watched him, not fully understanding his words, but sensing the importance of the act. He gave her a nod, hoping she recognized it as a sign of progress. Exhausted, they settled down to rest, taking comfort in the possibility, no matter how slight, that someone might hear the call. That night, Miles dreamed of drifting among the stars, of searching for a small, glimmering planet enveloped in ice. As he floated, he felt an unseen presence guiding him. When he opened his eyes, he found Rhea asleep beside him, breathing softly. For the first time since crashing, he felt a hesitant optimism, as though a door had cracked open in the fortress of despair. Perhaps there was a future here, hidden beneath the ice and darkness, if they could only persevere long enough to find it. A faint hum stirred them from uneasy slumber. Miles immediately reached for his pistol, while Rhea's ears flattened in alarm. The comm relay emitted a soft crackle, its tiny indicator light flashing erratically. For one electrifying moment, Miles thought they had received a response, but the noise soon faded back into static, leaving only the drip of melting ice and their own anxious breaths. Disappointment weighed on him, but Rhea set a comforting hand on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, yet it conveyed solidarity. Though they came from different worlds, they were partners now, in this fight against isolation and an unforgiving environment. They prepared for another day of exploration. Miles strapped on the meager gear he possessed, double-checking the pistol's energy levels. The weapon had precious few shots left. Rhea, for her part, tested her injured shoulder. Though still stiff, she seemed determined to continue. Slipping through the cavern's winding corridors, they came upon an area where the ice receded to reveal metal floors. Strange glyphs were etched along the surface, possibly warnings or instructions. They followed the corridor until it opened into a large chamber, reminiscent of a command center or control hub. Overhead, the ceiling arched in a graceful dome, once illuminated by overhead lights, but now shrouded in darkness, except for the glow of their crystals and flashlights. In the center of the room, a massive console stood silent, its panels coated in centuries of frost. Dozens of monitors lined the walls, each cracked or shattered. Rhea approached one monitor that was partially intact, her reflection ghostly in the fractured glass. She reached out, tracing the grooves as if recalling a long-forgotten memory. Miles joined her, shining his light on the console. Numerous buttons and switches were arranged in a language foreign to him, though some symbols bore a tenuous resemblance to universal icons for power, data transfer, or emergency lockdown. Taking a breath, he pressed what he guessed was a power switch. Nothing happened. He tried a few more buttons. The console emitted a sputtering click, followed by a series of flickers in the overhead lighting. Then, miraculously, a portion of the control panel lit up with a pale glow. Rhea flinched backward, startled. He too felt his heart leap. Actual power still coursed through some ancient generator deep within the complex. The room remained in partial darkness, but a faint hum indicated that at least some of the systems were online. Miles studied the console's readouts. Most of the text was indecipherable glyphs, but a few diagrams suggested a schematic of the subterranean city. He tapped a screen, watching as colored lines converged on a central node. Was it a power core, a communications hub, or something else entirely? Rhea observed him, her eyes darting between the console's lights and his face. He tried to convey his thoughts, pointing at the schematic, then at his comm relay, then at the ceiling. Hoping she'd understand, he was looking for a stronger signal or a power source. She nodded slowly, though her expression was tinged with apprehension. Encouraged by the console's faint life, Miles attempted another series of inputs. The screens flickered, and one of them displayed a rotating 3D image, a mechanical figure that bore a striking resemblance to the hunter drone. Next to the image were several lines of alien script, each blinking methodically. Suddenly, the overhead speakers crackled. A harsh, synthesized voice echoed through the chamber, a language unknown, but tinted with aggression. Rhea's ears flattened, and a snarl crept onto her lips. Miles felt his stomach knot. The voice repeated itself, perhaps an automated security alert triggered by his tinkering. Then the monitors went dark, and the hum ceased. Plunging the room back into gloom, they stood still, listening to the drip of melting ice. Seconds later, a distant clanking sound resonated through the corridor they had come from. Something was stirring, likely more drones. Awakened by the console's brief activation, Rhea barked a warning, and Miles understood. They needed to move, or risk being cornered in this chamber. With a final look at the inert console, frustration mingling with curiosity, he turned to follow her into the labyrinth of corridors once more. A tense chase ensued, with the clanking echoes growing louder. Whatever they had awakened was not content to let them wander freely. Now and then, they glimpsed mechanical shapes flickering in the half-light, small drones, each armed with scanning beams and menacing appendages. They retreated deeper, guided by the twists and turns of the corridor. Icy walls gave way again to natural rock, signaling a transition from the ancient facility to more organic caverns. Finally, they emerged near an underground river, a sluggish flow of meltwater trickling through a winding channel. The water cast tiny reflections on the walls, dancing like fragments of starlight in the darkness. Panting, they took cover behind a rock outcropping. Rhea's eyes shone with determination, but also fatigue. The short skirmishes, the near-constant vigilance, the sub-zero temperatures, it was wearing them both down. Miles inhaled deeply, trying to steady his shaking hands. They had uncovered important clues about this place, but each discovery carried new perils. The mechanical forces were not just random drones wandering aimlessly. Some dormant system had been partially reactivated, likely reinitiating old protocols. Whatever had happened centuries or millennia ago, the echoes of that conflict still resonated, hungry for new prey. And so, crouched by the murmuring water, they gathered their resolve to venture even deeper. Braving the unknown in the hope that salvation, or at least answers, lay hidden in the depths of Borealis. Miles was running out of time. He could feel it in the numbness of his fingers, the aching of his joints, and the fading glow of the portable heater's last power cell. Each day he felt more certain that if rescue did not come soon, he might never leave this ice world. Yet, hope persisted like a stubborn spark. The partial activation of the console proved there was still power beneath the ice, an entire infrastructure waiting to be tapped or roused to hostility. Perhaps there was a more stable energy source he could harness, enough to boost the comm relay's range and broadcast a proper distress beacon. Rhea seemed to sense his desperation. She had begun leading him along specific paths in the ruins, as if she knew which routes to avoid. More than once, she halted, ears pricked, just as a patrol of drones clattered by, oblivious to their hidden alcove. There was a familiarity in her movements that suggested she had navigated these corridors before. Eventually, they reached a cavern dominated by towering pillars of ice. At the chamber's center stood a statue, depicting three wolf-like figures surrounding a large, angular shape. Time had worn away the statue's details, but Miles recognized the stylized lines of a mechanical construct. He guessed it might represent an ancient alliance between Rhea's ancestors and some form of advanced technology, or perhaps the beginning of a war. Rhea approached the statue reverently, running her clawed hand along the carved stone. She turned to Miles, her expression somber, and gestured toward the mechanical shape in the middle. With soft growls and clicks, she seemed to be explaining something, though he could only guess at her meaning. Her hand then drifted to the wolf figures, each carved with regal bearing. He recalled the carvings of the mechanical effigies, the suggestion of a past partnership. Could it be that Borealis had once enjoyed harmony between its native race and an advanced robotic presence? What if something had shattered that peace, leading to the monstrous hunter drones patrolling the planet's surface? Miles shook his head, frustrated by the gulf of language. But Rhea gently tapped the center of his chest, then placed her hand over her own heart, as though emphasizing a shared essence. It reminded him that, despite species and language barriers, they shared the same desire to survive, to find meaning amid devastation. Pressing onward, they descended through another rocky tunnel. The temperature here was even colder than in the upper ruins, forcing them to rely on brief bursts of the heater to keep hypothermia at bay. Their progress slowed to a crawl as they had to carefully navigate slippery ice and narrow ledges, where a single misstep meant a fatal fall into dark chasms below. Hours later, they stumbled into a new chamber, this one lined with rows of cylindrical pods arranged in neat columns. Each pod was made of opaque material, frost covering their surfaces. Some stood upright, others were toppled over, damaged by the shifting ice. Miles approached one, wiping away a thin layer of frost. Inside, he saw what looked like mechanical components interwoven with organic matter, a bizarre fusion that sent a chill up his spine. Rhea hovered behind him, tail swishing anxiously. Something about this place unnerved her. Miles felt it too, an almost tangible tension in the air. Had these pods once housed living creatures, or were they designed for constructing cybernetic entities? The possibilities were endless and terrifying. As he moved to a second pod, he noticed a faint glow from within. Carefully, he cleared more ice. Beneath the translucent casing, a pulsing red light beat like a mechanical heart. Startled, he stepped back. Rhea crouched, ears pinned, letting out a warning growl. Whatever lay dormant in this pod was still alive or operational. Before he could investigate further, the floor trembled. A low rumble, like thunder in the earth, shook loose shards of ice from the ceiling. The pods rattled ominously. Miles and Rhea exchanged alarmed looks. Instinctively, they moved toward the exit tunnel. Another quake followed, and the ceiling in one corner collapsed, sending debris crashing down. A thick cloud of ice crystals filled the air, stinging their eyes. A metallic shriek echoed through the chamber. From the newly opened breach, elongated limbs emerged multiple drones, their sensor arrays ablaze with predatory intent. They swarmed like insects, clattering against the floor and walls, scanning each pod. One latched onto the pod with the glowing red light, connecting a cable like appendage to it. Sparks danced as data transferred. Miles raised his pistol, unsure whether to shoot or run. Rhea grabbed his arm firmly, urgency in her gaze. They both knew the odds of surviving a firefight against so many drones were slim. Reluctantly, he nodded, and they withdrew silently, retracing their steps to the corridor. As they fled, the walls shook again, hinting at deeper seismic shifts or perhaps the power systems waking up in the depths of the planet. Fear and curiosity warred within Miles. Whatever those pods were, the drones clearly sought to protect or reactivate them. Could that be the key to unlocking Borealis's ancient secrets and perhaps a chance for rescue? Yet, for now, self-preservation prevailed. They needed to evade the swarm, find somewhere safer. Miles clutched his heater close, feeling its dwindling warmth. Rhea led him away from the commotion, back into the labyrinth of ice and rock, where every footstep echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Together, They vanished into the darkness, haunted by the pulsing red glow that followed them in memory, a grim beacon of the unknown forces stirring beneath the frozen surface. Their retreat from the pod chamber led them to a maze of half-collapsed tunnels. Fissures in the ice forced them to shimmy through tight spaces, occasionally requiring them to crawl on hands and knees. The temperature dropped with each passing hour, gnawing at their bones despite their best efforts to stay warm. Miles felt his strength flagging. His lips were chapped, his fingers stiff. Even the simplest movements required focus. At times, his vision blurred, and he wondered if frostbite was already setting in. Yet, to stop would mean certain death. Rhea fared little better. Her fur, once a sleek, dark coat, was now matted with ice, and blood from her earlier wound had stained patches crimson. Still, she pressed onward, guiding Miles whenever he stumbled, pulling him to his feet with surprising gentleness. Every so often, the tunnels opened into pockets of ancient corridors or small chambers. Most were devoid of anything useful, just frosted over relics of a bygone era. Miles kept one ear trained for the buzzing or clanking of drones. But for now, the darkness was silent. Eventually, they emerged into a cavern lit by the same bioluminescent crystals they had seen before. The space was smaller than the previous grand halls, but offered a momentary respite. With numb hands, Miles activated the heater for a precious 10-minute cycle, rationing its final power. They huddled, together, breathing shallowly. Hunger gnawed at Miles's belly. He was down to his last protein bar, and Rhea had none. She had been relying on small scraps of alien flora or the occasional rodent-like creature that scurried in the shadows. But even those were becoming scarce. A sense of despair threatened to overwhelm him. They had found no safe refuge, no direct route to a power core or communications node. Worse, each new discovery seemed to unveil more dangers. He wondered if it would have been kinder to die swiftly in the crash than to prolong this endless struggle. At his side, Rhea sensed his turmoil. She let out a low, soft growl, pressing closer to share warmth. Looking into her eyes, Miles saw the same determination that had brought them this far. Her people might be gone, scattered, extinct, or enslaved by these machines, but she was still here, clinging to life, forging an alliance with a stranger. That fact alone rekindled a tiny flame in his chest. He wasn't alone. Together, they had already overcome dangers that would have claimed them individually. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path forward. Drawing in a ragged breath, Miles forced himself to his feet. He rummaged through his pack, removing the salvaged components and the comm relay. Even if they were deep underground, he wanted to see if he could boost the device's range somehow, or at least ensure it could keep transmitting a signal intermittently. He had a small spool of wire and some leftover circuit boards. With Rhea watching intently, he began piecing them together. The idea was to create a makeshift antenna that could resonate with the planet's mineral composition, possibly bouncing a signal through natural crystalline deposits. It was a wild theory, but desperation drove innovation. Hours passed in silent labor. His fingers trembled from cold and fatigue, but he persisted. Rhea occasionally reached out to steady a wire or offer him a crystal shard she had pried from the cavern wall. Her help, while limited by the language gap, was invaluable. At last, the contraption was assembled, a jury-rigged antenna of sorts, coiled around a crystal shard. He connected it to the comm relay and flipped a switch. A faint red light winked to life. Static hissed, then fell silent, sighing. He keyed the distress frequency once more. This is Miles Vincent, Frontier Exploratory Corps, stranded on Borealis. Need immediate assistance. He repeated the transmission 3 times, then waited. Only silence. Still, he set the relay to pulse the signal every hour, as long as the power source lasted. Closing his eyes, he leaned back against the cave wall, letting exhaustion wash over him. Rhea curled beside him, offering a warmth that no machine could replicate. As the last of the heater's power ebbed, darkness seeped back in, filling every crack of their small refuge. Somewhere above them, The storms of Borealis raged, and the mechanical sentinels patrolled. Yet, in this tiny pocket of stillness, two survivors held on to each other, refusing to surrender to the endless night. Time blurred in the darkness. Miles and Rhea fell into a routine of cautious scavenging and makeshift repairs, punctuated by moments of tense hiding whenever the echo of drones grew near. Yet, as the days crawled by, the thread of trust that bound them became woven into something stronger. They developed a rudimentary sign language, stringing together gestures and simple sounds to convey basic ideas: food, danger, hide, come. With practice, they added more nuanced signs, reflecting deeper concepts like mechanical enemy, ancient place, and need warmth. The progress was slow and often frustrating, but each small breakthrough felt like a triumph. At night, or what passed for night, in this perpetual twilight, they shared stories in their own ways. Miles pointed at constellations on the battered star chart from his pack, tracing lines between distant stars. He named them softly Orion, Polaris, the Centauri system. Rhea would watch, ears perked, occasionally touching the chart as if to ask which star was her own. He wished he had an answer. She, in turn, gestured to the carvings in the ruins, making howling sounds and pantomiming scenes of hunting and celebration. Though he couldn't understand every detail, he caught glimpses of a rich cultural tapestry woven through dance, feast, and reverence for the cold yet bountiful land. He wished he could see Borealis in a time before it was overrun by mechanical nightmares. In these shared narratives, they found common ground. They were living creatures of flesh and blood, longing for connection, warmth, and a tomorrow worth fighting for. Sometimes, Rhea would rest her head on his shoulder, breathing softly, and the primal ache of loneliness would ease, replaced by a simple, profound comfort. Amid this growing bond, Miles's body showed signs of recovery. The daily scavenging walks kept his muscles from atrophying, and though the rations were sparse, he found just enough sustenance to keep going. Rhea's wound also healed slowly but steadily, leaving behind a thin scar beneath her fur. But the planet refused to grant them peace. One morning, while on a scouting trip for more salvage, they stumbled upon a fissure that opened into a lower level of the underground city. The walls here bore an unsettling mixture of organic and mechanical growth tangles of cables, interwoven with sinewy, root-like structures. At times, they seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence, reminiscent of the pods they had seen earlier. Rhea shuddered at the sight, and Miles felt an instinctive revulsion. It was as if the planet's technology had taken a life of its own, fusing with the very bedrock. They had no choice but to pass through the corridor, stepping gingerly over thick bundles of cables that snaked across the floor. Halfway through, a panel in the wall hissed open, releasing a cloud of icy vapor. A mechanical appendage emerged, a jointed arm ending in a set of pincers. It clamped onto Miles's ankle before he could react. With a cry, he aimed his pistol. But Rhea moved first. She slammed her claws into the base of the arm, severing wires and sending sparks flying. The arm went limp, releasing its grip. Miles backed away, heart pounding. From within the open panel, red lights flashed, and muffled alarms blared. They sprinted down the corridor, not daring to look back. Behind them, the sound of whirring servos and clattering metal chased them until they reached a vaulted chamber. There, they found a series of massive pillars covered in shifting holographic displays, some alien interface that flickered and pulsed. He paused briefly, transfixed by the holograms. They displayed streams of data, geometric patterns, and the occasional schematic of the entire subterranean complex. If he had more time and resources, he might have tried to decipher them or harness their power. But the relentless echo of approaching drones spurred him onward. Hand in hand, they bolted up a ramp leading to an upper tunnel, narrowly dodging the searchlights of mechanical sentinels, descending from the shadows. Their lungs burned from exertion, and their limbs quivered when they finally found a quiet alcove to hide in. Pressed against each other, panting, they waited until the distant drone of machinery faded. When silence returned, they exchanged weary nods. Each had saved the other's life countless times by now. Their eyes shone with a mutual determination, come what may. They would face it together. In the tenuous calm that followed, Miles felt a warmth deeper than mere survival could explain. It was a fragile connection, a wordless understanding that they belonged to each other now, forging a path through ice and ruin. And in that bond, he glimpsed the faintest promise of hope. The days stretched on, though time was a slippery concept in the eternal twilight of Borealis. In a half-buried chamber, near a cluster of luminous crystals, Miles discovered a partial stock of ancient rations, dehydrated food packets that seemed centuries old, yet remained sealed. The packaging bore odd symbols, but when tested, the contents proved not only edible, but surprisingly energy-dense. Though the taste was reminiscent of stale algae, the nutritional value revitalized them. Rhea wrinkled her snout at first bite, but after a few cautious tries, she devoured it hungrily. With renewed strength, their daily efforts at exploration became more productive. Miles felt his mind clearing, his resolve hardening. The hamper of raw physical exhaustion loosened its grip. In another surprising twist of fortune, they found a narrow vent through which a draft of warmer air flowed. Following it led them to a hidden section of the ruins with a functioning geothermal conduit. Heat seeped from cracks in the rock, creating pockets of relative warmth. They gratefully settled there for a time, allowing their bodies to recover from the brutal cold. Amid these pockets of respite, Miles worked tirelessly on his makeshift comm relay. The crystal antenna setup still transmitted periodic bursts. Whenever they reached higher ground or open caverns, he would power it up briefly, sending a fresh distress call. Though no response came, he clung to the belief that someone, somewhere, might detect his plea. Their bond continued to deepen. Rhea learned more of his improvised sign language, even imitating some of his English words. Though her vocal apparatus was not suited to human speech, each attempt sent a ripple of delight through Miles's weary heart. He found himself talking to her about Earth, about the frontier exploratory corps, and about the little house he once dreamed of owning in a temperate valley back home. She listened with an attentive tilt of her head, occasionally interrupting with a low rumble that might have meant sympathy or shared longing. In turn, she guided him through certain rituals of her own culture. One evening, by the glow of crystalline light, she carved patterns into the ice floor, using her claws' intricate spirals and symbols that seemed to tell a story. She would tap the shapes and make soft howls. Though he couldn't decipher their full meaning, he sensed they were an ode to ancestors, a mourning for the lost, or perhaps a prayer for deliverance. This fleeting peace, however, existed on borrowed time. Drones continued to appear at intervals, scanning corridors and chambers. Some were smaller, insect-like scouts. Others resembled heavier war machines. They were always on the move, their purpose still unclear, but they posed an ever-present threat. On one of their scouting excursions, Miles and Rhea stumbled upon a sealed metal door with flickering lights above it. A control panel glowed faintly, bearing the same glyphs they had seen earlier. Curious, Miles tried pressing a sequence of buttons, while Rhea watched his back for any sign of patrolling machines. With a hiss of decompression, the door slid open, revealing a chamber suffused with bluish light. The walls were lined with upright capsules, each containing what appeared to be the remains of Rhea's kind. The skeletons, draped in tattered garments, lay motionless behind glass panels. Some capsules contained only dust, as if centuries had reduced their occupants to ashes. Rhea froze, a strangled whimper escaping her throat. Miles could almost feel the pain radiating from her. These could have been her ancestors or kin, sealed away in a final attempt at preservation. A wave of grief crashed over him, and he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked at him, tears pooling in her golden eyes. They moved through the chamber quietly, reverently. At the far end, they found a console displaying what appeared to be medical data. Though neither could decipher the script, Miles guessed it was some sort of cryogenic stasis system that had failed long ago. If so, It painted a tragic picture, a civilization desperate for survival, turning to technology to outlast a cataclysm, only to be betrayed by time or mechanical revolt. Rhea let out a soft, keening howl. It was a sound that transcended language, a lament for all that was lost. Miles stood beside her, feeling helpless to offer comfort beyond his presence. Before long, they had to leave. The air in the chamber was stale, and they could hear distant machinery echoing in the corridors. Gently, Miles guided Rhea away, shutting the door behind them. As they walked, he could see the sorrow etched into her posture, her once proud bearing weighed down by ancient ghosts. In that moment, he vowed to do everything in his power to help her, whether that meant finding a future for them both on Borealis or contacting a rescue team that could whisk them away to safety. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but he refused to let her face it alone. The seismic tremors that had occasionally rattled the underground corridors grew more frequent, as if the planet itself braced for some grand upheaval. Miles and Rhea could feel the vibrations in their bones, rumbling beneath their feet like the distant growl of a sleeping giant. During one such tremor, they took shelter in a narrow passage, pressing against the icy wall as cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Chunks of ice fell, shattering on the ground. When the shaking subsided, they emerged to find a gaping fissure that led to a new section of the subterranean city, one that appeared far more intact. Beyond the fissure lay a broad avenue lined with alien architectural marvels. Tall spires rose to the cavern roof, some encrusted with crystalline growth. Others bore mechanical turrets that remained eerily silent, as if powered down centuries ago. In the dim light, it was like walking through a graveyard of skyscrapers from a forgotten civilization. Yet, as they advanced, they noticed signs of recent activity. Footprints, both mechanical treads and those resembling Rhea's paw-like structure, crossed the icy ground. The air hummed with a faint current of energy, and overhead, flickering lights cast intermittent shadows on the walls. They followed the footprints, each step laden with a mix of caution and curiosity. After a short distance, the avenue opened into a colossal chamber that could easily hold a fleet of starships. At its center stood a towering structure reminiscent of a spire or antenna, ringed by platforms and walkways. Lights blinked sporadically along its length, tracing patterns up into the darkness of the cavern ceiling. A group of drones patrolled the base, their metallic legs clicking. These were larger than the ones they had seen before, some armed with plasma cutters or grappling hooks. Miles counted at least 6, and there might be more lurking in the shadows. He and Rhea exchanged alarmed glances, ducking behind a chunk of rubble. Amid the drones, a solitary figure moved, another wolf-like being. Rhea stiffened, eyes widening. This individual appeared battered and exhausted, the fur tattered, eyes glazed with either fear or resignation. Around its neck was a collar that glowed with the same red light they had seen in the pods. The figure stumbled, and a drone prodded it forward with a menacing appendage. Miles felt anger flare within him. This was slavery, a living creature forced to serve or guide these soulless machines. He risked a look at Rhea. Fury burned in her eyes, and her claws flexed against the ground. Yet, they were outnumbered. A frontal assault would be suicide. Before they could formulate a plan, a series of blaring tones echoed through the chamber. The drones shifted into a formation, stepping aside as a massive set of doors slid open at the far end. 2 more mechanical hunters entered, each the size of a small vehicle, plated in black armor. Between them walked a tall, lithe apparatus shaped vaguely like a humanoid torso atop insectile legs. It moved with a purposeful gait, scanning the chamber as if surveying its domain. Miles swallowed hard. This new machine radiated authority, a presence both regal and terrifying. Panels along its sides glowed with alien glyphs, and a single, horizontal slit served as a sensor or eye. If the drones were pawns, this was a commander or overseer, the collared wolf like being collapsed to its knees before the overseer. A metallic limb extended, lifting the captive's chin. Something passed between them, an electronic pulse. a silent command. The captive let out a guttural moan that tugged at Miles's heart. Rhea trembled with rage, half rising as if to charge, but Miles gently restrained her. They would only die if they attacked now. A drone approached the overseer, plugging a cable into its chassis. The overseer quivered. Then an echoing, synthetic voice rang out in the same harsh language that had reverberated through the console earlier. Miles caught only fragments of meaning references to bio-units, data integration, compliance. The captive's head jerked forward as if in pain. Then the overseer turned, pointing toward the towering spire. The drones herded the captive up a ramp leading to the spire's core. Panels slid open, revealing an interior studded with mechanical limbs and glowing conduits. It resembled a nightmarish assimilation chamber. Miles fought the urge to retch. Whatever these machines were planning, it could not bode well for the wolf-like prisoner, or for anyone else. His mind raced. If they could somehow free the captive, they might learn more about the situation, possibly even find allies. But how to do so against a small army of drones and hunters? A trembling growl from Rhea told him she was ready to fight. Caution be damned. He recognized the turmoil in her eyes. This was one of her own, enslaved by the same machines that had likely driven her entire civilization to extinction. But survival required strategy. He placed a hand on her shoulder, meeting her gaze, urging her to wait. They would need a plan, an opportunity. Reckless bravery would get them both killed. As the captives disappeared into the spire's inner machinery, the overseer turned to confer with its drones. The mechanical chirps and screeches echoed off the cavern walls. Then, in a sudden burst of movement, the entire formation began to move deeper into the city, leaving only 2 sentinel drones to guard the spire entrance. A hush fell over the chamber. Miles and Rhea remained hidden, hearts pounding. The cold bit at them, but adrenaline kept them focused. Their path was clear. If deadly, they had to breach the spire and rescue that captive. If possible, doing so might unravel the secrets behind these machines, maybe even give them a shot at shutting down the system that tormented Borealis. Steeling themselves, they crept along the rubble, inching closer to the spire's base. Every scrape of their boots or rustle of fur felt deafening. With each step, they edged closer to a confrontation that could spell their doom or be the key to saving not just themselves, but whatever remained of Rhea's people. Breathing in shallow gasps, Miles and Rhea hunkered behind a fallen pillar of ice-coated metal. 50 yards ahead stood the spire's entrance, flanked by 2 sentinel drones. Each drone was armed with an energy lance attached to a jointed arm, crackling with latent power. Miles surveyed the area. The chamber was eerily quiet after the overseer and its entourage departed. Only the distant hum of machinery and the hiss of wind through a fractured ceiling vent disturbed the stillness. He counted his remaining plasma bolts 3, maybe 4 if he stretched the energy cell's capacity. Rhea, though formidable, had only her claws and teeth. They needed an advantage, an element of surprise. A direct assault would be suicide. His gaze fell upon a cluster of old support beams overhead, riddled with cracks from seismic tremors. If they could weaken one beam, it might collapse part of the ceiling onto the drones. It was a gamble. He couldn't be sure the debris would fall where they wanted. Still, it was better than charging headlong. With a few hand signals, he explained his idea to Rhea. She hesitated, then nodded, her eyes narrowing with fierce resolve. They crept around the perimeter, aiming to gain a vantage point directly above the sentinels. Scaling the ruins was a treacherous endeavor. The ice was slick, and cracks formed beneath their weight. More than once they nearly slipped into the chasm below, but they persisted, silently inching their way up to a narrow ledge overlooking the spire. From this vantage, Miles could see the battered supports overhead, a network of twisted metal like a spider's web. One well-placed shot might send it crashing down. He readied his pistol, aiming at the thickest joint. Then he exhaled, calming his shaking hands. The first shot cracked the beam, causing a thunderous groan. The drones below whirred in alarm, their sensor arrays swiveling upward. A volley of plasma fire erupted from them, scorching the ledge. Miles ducked as hot shards of metal spattered around him. He squeezed off another shot. The beam fractured completely, releasing a cascade of broken metal and ice. The drones tried to scatter, but the falling debris struck them with crushing force. Sparks flew, and one drone's sensor light flickered out immediately. The second drone managed to roll partially clear, though one of its legs was pinned. It let out a shrill, warbling alarm. Seizing the moment, Miles and Rhea scrambled down the ledge. Halfway down, the pinned drone managed to free itself, pivoting its energy lance toward them. A bolt of plasma lanced out, narrowly missing Miles's head. He fired back, the last of his pistol's charge scorching the drone's sensor array. The machine shuddered, collapsing in a shower of sparks. They landed at the base of the spire, adrenaline surging. Overhead, the fallen debris formed a chaotic slope of twisted metal and ice, partially blocking the approach from any reinforcements. For now, they had the entrance to themselves. Rhea bared her fangs and let out a triumphant growl. But the real battle was just beginning. Stepping inside, they found a cavernous interior dominated by rotating conduits that pulsed with eerie green light. The air felt charged, as though a static field danced across their skin. Catwalks crisscrossed overhead, and various alcoves hummed with the resonance of hidden machinery. Deeper in, they heard a muffled cry. The captive wolf-like being was somewhere within this labyrinth. Rhea took the lead, following the echoes with her sensitive hearing. Miles trailed close, scanning every shadow for lurking drones. They passed several sealed compartments, each with a transparent viewport revealing grotesque amalgamations of mechanical limbs and organic tissue. Some were inert, others twitched as if half alive, responding to an unseen stimulus. Miles's stomach churned, and Rhea's fur bristled in horror. Navigating a spiral ramp, they reached a walkway that overlooked a wide chamber. There, the captive was strapped to a vertical frame, surrounded by cables and robotic appendages. Drones flitted around, adjusting the cables, while the overseer itself loomed in the background. The captive let out another anguished moan as a mechanical arm probed the collar at their neck. Rhea tensed, ready to leap into the fray, but Miles grabbed her arm, nodding toward the half-dozen drones and the overseer. Rhea frowned, frustration etched on her face, but she understood charging in blindly would be suicide. They needed a diversion or a strategy to take down the overseer. As they crouched, a new tremor rippled through the spire, and the overhead lights flickered. The overseer raised its head, scanning the chamber as if sensing an anomaly. In that moment of distraction, a single word blared through Miles's mind. Now. With no time to plan further, he grabbed a loose piece of piping from the walkway and hurled it across the chamber. It clanged against a distant console, drawing the drone's attention. In the split second before they could refocus, he jumped down onto the nearest one, smashing it with the butt of his pistol. Sparks flew, and the machine collapsed. Rhea followed suit, pouncing on a second drone, ripping at its sensor array. The captive wolf-like being lifted their gaze, hope flickering in their dull eyes. The overseer spun around, unleashing a surge of crackling energy from a mounted projector. The bolt slammed into a nearby console, exploding in a burst of hot shrapnel. Chaos erupted. Drones scattered. The overseer bellowed in synthetic rage, and the spire's walls rattled under the strain of repeated tremors. In the confusion, Miles dashed toward the captive, fumbling for a way to release the restraints. Rhea, meanwhile, bounded across the chamber, tangling with two drones that cornered her near a bank of flickering monitors. Another surge of energy crackled past Miles, singing the hairs on his neck. He yanked at a lever on the captive's frame, releasing one shackle, then another. The collar remained in place, pulsing with crimson light. The captive slumped forward, barely conscious. The overseer advanced, mechanical legs clacking, arms bristling with lethal implements. Miles's pistol was spent, and all he had left was the drone's broken arm. Gritting his teeth, he swung it like a club at the overseer's sensor module. but the machine blocked effortlessly, sending him sprawling. Just when he thought the end had come, Rhea appeared from behind the overseer, bounding onto its back. She sank her claws into the jointed plating, ripping out wires with a fierce roar. The overseer screeched, convulsing violently. Miles seized the opportunity, scrambling to his feet and grabbing the captive around the waist. Together, he and the captive staggered away from the platform, dodging a thrashing limb that threatened to slice them in half. Rhea hung on tenaciously, tearing at the overseer's core. Sparks showered the floor. The machine let out a final, tormented shriek before collapsing in a crash of metal, smoke curling from its ruined chassis. Panting, Rhea slid off, stumbling as she tried to regain her footing. Miles rushed to her side, relief flooding him. In the sudden silence, they surveyed the carnage, broken drones, shattered consoles, and the still form of the once terrifying overseer. The captive wolf like being leaned against a railing, trembling. Rhea approached gently, her eyes full of compassion. She reached for the collar, which now lay dormant, its red glow fading. After a few tugs and a twist of a hidden latch, the collar snapped open, falling to the floor with a hollow clang. For a moment, no one spoke. The captive's eyes welled with tears, gratitude mingled with pain. Then, as more tremors shook the spire, Miles realized their time was running out. The structure groaned ominously, and the overhead lights flickered in a rapid strobe. They had to leave, now, with hurried motions. They helped the captive to their feet, supporting them between them. Together, the three survivors limped toward the exit, uncertain of what new perils awaited outside, but resolved to face them united in their fight against a merciless enemy. The cavern beyond the spire's entrance was in turmoil. Ice chunks rained from the ceiling as tremors grew stronger. Some hidden tectonic shift or mechanical meltdown, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction. Pipes burst in jets of steam, and crystalline columns flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Miles and Rhea half-carried, half-guided the rescued captive, whose steps were unsteady. The collar had left burns along their neck, and fatigue weighed them down like lead. Still, they pressed on, navigating the rubble-strewn passages, searching for a stable area away from the collapsing architecture. Behind them, the spire listed precariously, cables snapping with resounding cracks. Smoke and sparks spewed from the ruined overseer's chamber, and the stench of scorched metal filled the air. It was as though the entire complex was imploding in slow motion, consumed by centuries of tension finally unleashed. They emerged into a wide corridor, only to find it blocked by a fissure that belched plumes of volcanic heat. Gasping, they backtracked, dodging drones that scuttled aimlessly in confusion. Some machines appeared to have malfunctioned entirely, staggering in circles or collapsing, as if their power had been severed from a central source. Taking a side passage, they finally found a region of the underground city that seemed structurally intact. The walls here were carved stone, rather than metal, decorated with faded murals depicting Rhea's people. One large mural showed a figure resembling the captive they had just saved, whether it was a direct ancestor or a legendary hero. It was impossible to tell. The resemblance was uncanny, though, and did not escape Rhea's noticing glance. They paused to catch their breath. Miles surveyed the captive's injuries. Beyond the burns and overall exhaustion, they seemed stable enough. Rhea nuzzled the newcomer gently, a reassuring gesture. The captive, still trembling, managed a weak smile, a glimpse of relief amidst despair. Despite the momentary respite, the rumbling continued to intensify. Time was short. The city above them might be fracturing, or perhaps the entire subterranean complex was on the verge of collapse. Miles thought of his comm relay, the half-functioning device that still pulsed out a distress signal. Would rescue ships brave Borealis's brutal atmosphere in time, or would he and Rhea die beneath the ice? He shook off the grim thoughts. For now, their priority was survival. He motioned to Rhea and the captive, pointing down a corridor that sloped upward. Perhaps it led closer to the surface, where they could attempt to find stable ground or even reach the remains of his ship. They traversed the corridor, supporting the newcomer when they stumbled. All around them, ancient structures groaned, some toppling with deafening crashes. The entire environment was in chaos, as if the planet itself was attempting to cleanse the scars of war and entomb the mechanical menace once and for all. To Miles's surprise, the corridor opened into a partially caved-in chamber that he recognized, the same large hall with the statue of Rhea's ancestors encircling a mechanical construct. The path they had taken had looped back in a circle, but the hall was hardly recognizable now. Cracks riddled the floor, and the statue leaned dangerously, chunks of stone missing from its once proud figures. They skirted around the edges of the room, avoiding a massive chasm that had opened up in the floor. Steam hissed from the depths below, and the smell of sulfur tainted the air. As they passed the statue, Rhea paused, gazing up at the carved images. A sorrowful resignation filled her eyes. Miles understood the sentiment this history, was disintegrating before their eyes. The rescued captive let out a series of soft clicks and whines, pointing weakly to the statue. Miles couldn't decipher the meaning, but Rhea nodded, pressing her forehead against the stone in a gesture of farewell. The moment was brief, yet it felt like a funeral rite, a final parting from the past. With the city collapsing around them, they had no choice but to continue. They pushed through a partially blocked archway and found an incline that rose toward a distant glow, possibly the surface. The upward path was littered with debris, forcing them to climb carefully, one step at a time. At last, they emerged into a glacier-scoured canyon, the biting wind of Borealis greeting them with a howl. The sky was shrouded in perpetual twilight, but after the claustrophobic darkness below, it felt almost liberating. Miles inhaled the frigid air, eyes watering, as he surveyed the bleak landscape. They were not alone. Drones littered the ice, many inert or writhing feebly, as if disconnected from their central command. The quake had not spared the surface, either. Great fissures opened in the glaciers, releasing geysers of icy vapor into the sky. Exhausted, they collapsed against a ridge of snow, huddled together for warmth. The captive looked around in wide-eyed awe. Perhaps they had not seen the surface for a very long time. Rhea wrapped an arm around the newcomer, a protective gesture. Miles checked the comm relay's status. Heart racing. The battery indicator blinked ominously low. Steeling himself, he activated the final distress burst. Static filled the speaker, then cleared for a moment, just enough for him to repeat his message, Mayday. Miles Vincent. Stranded on Borealis. Coordinates unknown. Please respond. Silence. He was about to shut off the relay when a faint crackle emerged, barely discernible over the wind. Then a human voice, distorted but unmistakable, broke through the static. This is the ECS Marathon. Receiving you faintly. Respond. Over. Hope exploded within him like a supernova. He fumbled with the transmitter, nearly dropping it in his haste. Marathon. This is Miles Vincent. Do you copy? I'm at the southwestern glacier quadrant, near a collapsed subterranean city. 2 survivors with me, requesting immediate extraction. A garbled reply followed. Coordinates. Minimal reading. Storms interfering. Hold position. Rescue inbound. It was enough. Relief coursed through him, tears burning cold on his cheeks. He looked at Rhea, grinning like a madman. She might not understand the exact words, but the joy in his face was unmistakable. The captive, too, seemed to sense that salvation was at hand, a spark returning to their weary eyes. Against the pale light of Borealis's sky, they clung to each other, forging a circle of warmth and kinship. Beneath them, the planet rumbled in its final throes of transformation, burying the nightmares of an ancient war. Somewhere overhead, a rescue ship sliced through the storm, guided by a frail signal of hope. They had survived, and in their survival, perhaps they had lit a small flame of rebirth for a world long forsaken. Miles could hardly believe his ears. After so long in the silent dark, the crackling voice over the comm seemed unreal. Yet, it was real enough. A rescue ship was en route, even as the wind whipped ice crystals against his visor, and his limbs trembled with exhaustion. He felt buoyed by a surge of euphoria. Rhea watched him, uncertainty in her eyes. She glanced at the comm relay, then at the vast, tumultuous sky. Though she recognized his elation, her reaction was guarded, as if waiting for confirmation that this supposed rescue was not another cruel trick of fate. The rescued captive, still leaning on Rhea, chuffed softly, a question in their tone. Miles nodded, trying to mime that help was coming from above. But the captive's gaze held both hope and dread, as if uncertain whether the arrival of strangers would be a blessing or a new form of enslavement. As they waited, the storm intensified, swirling snow into a white vortex. Miles checked his handheld scanner, the device that had once been part of the Avalon's navigation suite. It flickered erratically, but he caught a faint energy reading indicative of an incoming craft. Relief warred with the fear that the ship might not pinpoint their exact location in time. He scoured the terrain for a vantage point, spotting a nearby ice outcropping that rose like a jagged spire from the glacier. It wasn't tall by mountainous standards, but it stood out against the otherwise flat expanse. If they could climb it, perhaps they could signal the rescue ship more effectively. Signaling Rhea, he set off, trudging through knee-deep snow. The wind resisted each step, blowing shards of ice into his visor. Rhea helped the captive follow, though every few steps, they stumbled, panting heavily. Miles wished he had something to ease the captive's pain, but his medkit was all but depleted. Reaching the base of the ice spire, Miles drew the flare gun he had salvaged from the Avalon. He had only one flare left, a final beacon. With the rescue ship scanning the area, a bright flare might just guide them in. He turned to Rhea and the captive, motioning for them to take shelter from the wind behind a boulder. Clambering up the spire was treacherous. The ice was slick, and cracks formed beneath his weight. Twice he nearly slipped, saved only by his gloved grip on jagged protrusions. At last, he reached a small ledge about halfway up, high enough to offer an unobstructed view of the sky. He braced himself, heart thumping. Pulling the flare gun from his belt, he aimed it upward. His breath caught. If the rescue ship didn't see this flare, they might never find him in the storm. If the wind blew the flare off course, or if the gun misfired, his last hope would vanish in the swirling snow. Steeling himself, he squeezed the trigger. The flare shot out, arcing into the air in a brilliant streak of crimson. It cast an eerie glow across the glacier, illuminating the wind-whipped plains in flickering red light. For a moment, it was beautiful, painting the ice in colors reminiscent of a distant sunset. Then the flare dissipated, leaving a lingering spark that slowly faded into the swirling darkness. Miles held his breath, scanning the horizon for any sign of the rescue craft. Seconds stretched into eternity. The storm roared. His limbs felt like they were turning to stone in the cold. At last, he glimpsed movement, a faint glimmer of lights, descending through the low-hanging clouds. Hope surged anew. The shape grew larger, resolving into the unmistakable outline of a dropship, its thrusters battling the gale. Floodlights pierced the storm, sweeping across the landscape like probing search beams. Exhilaration filled him, tinged with relief so profound it was almost painful. He waved his arms, though he doubted the crew could see his tiny figure against the ice. Still, the dropship hovered, then touched down a few hundred yards away, engines whining against the wind. He scrambled down from the spire, nearly slipping on the icy ledges. Rhea rushed to meet him, her golden eyes shining with cautious hope. The captive leaned on her, gazing at the dropship in awe. From the ship's side hatch, figures in bulky environmental suits emerged, weapons and medical gear at the ready. They moved in a practiced formation, scanning for threats. Miles called out, voice cracking over the wind, "Over here. We need medical assistance." One of the suits hurried over, brandishing a scanning device. Another radioed back to the ship, presumably confirming they had located the survivors. Miles slumped in relief as the rescue team surrounded them, guiding them toward the ship's warm interior. He glanced at Rhea, noticing her stiffen, ears flattened in apprehension. She had never seen such technology up close, nor encountered other humans. The captive trembled, As if recalling the horrors of mechanical captivity, Miles stepped forward, arms raised to show no threat, and spoke to the rescue team. "They're with me," he said urgently. "They're both survivors. Please. We need to get them to safety." The medic nodded, scanning Rhea and the captive. Another soldier covered them with a heated blanket. Miles's eyes welled with gratitude as he felt the first wave of genuine warmth envelop them. Climbing aboard the drop ship, they were ushered into a cramped but welcoming compartment. The doors sealed behind them, cutting off the howling wind. Overhead lights hummed softly. Miles collapsed onto a bench, every muscle screaming in a mix of agony and relief. Rhea settled beside him, uncertain, while the captive lay back, eyes closing in exhaustion. As the engines roared to life, lifting them off the ice, Miles gazed out a small viewport. The glacier receded below, scarred by fissures and littered with half-buried machinery. Far in the distance, the spire and much of the subterranean city sank into oblivion, consumed by the planet's relentless transformation. He wondered how many secrets and tragedies were lost in that frozen labyrinth. But for now, they were safe. Rescue had come. And in that small, pressurized cabin, with Rhea's fur brushing against his side and the captive breathing steadily, Miles allowed himself a rare, unguarded smile. They had endured the crucible of Borealis. Whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together, man, wolf like allies, and a future still waiting to be written. The ECS Marathon orbited Borealis like a gleaming sentinel, its hull reflecting the faint light of the distant star. Within its medbay, Miles and his two alien companions found themselves at the center of a flurry of activity. Doctors, nurses, and xenobiologists bustled around, scanning and probing, marveling at the physiology of Rhea and the newly rescued captive. Miles sat on a metal bench, a thermal blanket wrapped around him. Despite the dryness and warmth of the ship's recycled air, he couldn't stop shivering. Trauma and relief vied for dominance in his system. A human medic approached, checking his vitals. "We're stabilizing your body temperature," she said gently. "You've got mild frostbite and some bruised ribs, but you'll recover." He nodded absently, eyes drifting to Rhea across the room. She stared at the advanced medical equipment with wide eyes, flinching whenever a scanning device hummed near her. A xenobiologist attempted to calm her in a soothing voice. Rhea's ears twitched, her posture guarded yet not hostile. The captive was another story. They lay on a diagnostic bed, sedated to allow the medical staff to treat their burns and injuries. A specialized sensor was clamped around their neck, monitoring vitals that no human doctor had ever seen before. Every so often, a beep or hiss would make them stir, as if haunted by memories of captivity. Some of the marathon's crew whispered in hushed tones, exchanging nervous glances at the presence of alien creatures. Miles overheard fragments of conversation. Wolf, like alien, didn't think anything lived down there. Could be dangerous. Resentment flared within him, but he reminded himself that ignorance often bred fear. He resolved to bridge that gap if he could. After a battery of tests, the doctors gave Miles the all-clear, minus instructions to rest and hydrate. He immediately went to Rhea's side, ignoring his own fatigue. She eyed him warily, not out of distrust, but from sensory overload. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and she relaxed marginally. "They're trying to help," he murmured, unsure if she understood. Her ears flicked, and she nodded slowly. The tense line of her jaw eased. He exhaled, relieved that she at least recognized him as an ally in this new environment. Captain Armitage of the Marathon arrived soon after, a tall woman with a stern but compassionate face. She wore a crisp uniform and carried herself with an air of steady authority. Upon seeing Miles, her expression softened. "Vincent, I presume." He stood, offering a shaky salute. "Yes, thank you for coming," she nodded. "We picked up your distress call barely. Storm activity almost drowned out your signal. Glad we found you in time." Miles swallowed, memories of the deadly cold washing over him. "So am I. And these two." He glanced at Rhea and the captive. "They're survivors. They saved my life. I owe them everything. Armitage studied the aliens. We'll do our best to care for them. The medical team is already analyzing their physiology to see what they need. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words. You should know. Command will have a lot of questions. About Borealis. About the machines down there. About, well, everything. He nodded. I'll tell them whatever I know. But these two need safety and freedom. That planet, it's lethal. Her gaze flicked to Rhea. I understand. For now, rest. We'll be jumping to a safer orbit soon, away from that gravitational anomaly the planet's generating. Once we're out of immediate danger, we can handle debriefing. Welcome aboard, Mr. Vincent. She offered a handshake, which Miles returned. Then she departed, leaving him with a swirl of conflicting emotions: gratitude, relief, apprehension. He turned back to Rhea. She touched his arm, as if to ask if everything was all right. He managed a wan smile. We're safe, he whispered. Safe. Over the next few hours. The medbay quieted as the immediate rush subsided. The captive remained sedated, though stable. Rhea dozed fitfully, her fur occasionally rising at unfamiliar noises. Miles stayed nearby, ready to reassure her. When she woke from a short nap, he showed her a tablet with images of star systems, trying to explain that they were no longer on Borealis, that they now drifted in space above it. Her eyes widened with wonder, ears twitching as he scrolled through images of Earth, various colonies, and starships. He wondered what her future would hold. Would she adapt to life among humans? Or would she yearn for her home, brutal though it was? And what of the rest of her kind? Were there more survivors hidden in Borealis's icy depths? Or was she the last? In time, the Marathon's engines hummed to life, and the subtle shift in gravity signaled their departure from Borealis's orbit. Miles felt a pang. He had hoped to glean more about the planet's secrets. But after all they'd been through, perhaps it was best to leave that frozen tomb behind. As they accelerated, a view screen on the far wall displayed Borealis shrinking to a bluish-white orb, cracks of molten light visible from orbit where seismic forces raged. Miles watched, heart heavy, mind awash in questions without easy answers. Rhea followed his gaze, her reflection superimposed on the image of her planet. He gently took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. They were leaving her home, likely forever. Sadness flickered in her eyes, yet beneath it, a quiet acceptance. She returned the squeeze, then laid her head gently against his shoulder. In that fleeting moment, with Borealis slipping away behind them, they found solace in each other, a testament that even the harshest frontiers could not extinguish the spark of kinship. Docked in the Marathon's main hangar, Miles felt a strange sense of déjà vu, stepping onto a human vessel after so long on an alien world. The corridors were sterile and well lit, with humming life support and the occasional chatter of crew members. Yet, he felt a pang for the raw quiet of Borealis's ice caves, the primal closeness that bound him and Rhea together in their fight for survival. Still, he welcomed a hot shower and fresh clothing. The Marathon's quartermaster provided him with a simple jumpsuit, explaining that a formal uniform would be issued once he was debriefed. Bathing for the first time, in what felt like an eternity, Miles scrubbed off layers of grime, feeling like he was shedding the ghosts of Borealis. For Rhea, the notion of artificial hygiene was confusing at first. She eyed the shower stall suspiciously, growling low at the steam. But with patience and gentle demonstration, she caught on, stepping beneath the warm spray. Miles stood nearby, offering soap and towels, mindful of her privacy, but also ready to calm her if she panicked. She adapted quickly, emerging clean and somewhat bemused by the sensation of being doused in warm water rather than icy wind. Once they were both somewhat presentable, they reconvened in a small lounge area designated for their temporary quarters. The captive, who had begun to show signs of alertness, remained in medical observation under sedation. Miles constantly checked in with the medbay staff for updates. Relieved each time, they assured him the captive was stable. The lounge was cozy compared to Borealis's harsh expanse, with padded seats and an observation window looking out into the star-speckled void. Rhea paced around, sniffing the walls and furniture, occasionally pressing her nose against the glass to stare at the infinite night. Miles chuckled, trying to imagine how bizarre space travel must seem to her. After a while, Captain Armitage arrived, accompanied by a stern-faced man wearing the insignia of an Alliance intelligence officer. They introduced themselves formally. "Lieutenant Commander Sorensen," the man said, giving a curt nod. "I've been assigned to gather your report, Mr. Vincent." Miles's gut tightened. He had expected a debrief, but the intelligence officer's demeanor made it feel more like an interrogation. Still, he had nothing to hide. Armitage motioned for them to sit. She glanced at Rhea, who stood guard beside Miles's chair, postured defensive. "We understand your friend here may not follow our language," she said softly. "We'll make this as quick and clear as possible." Miles nodded. "Thank you. I'll do my best to explain things to her later." Sorensen cleared his throat, activating a hollow recorder. "Begin. State your full name and position." Miles inhaled. "Miles Vincent. Pilot and survey specialist with the Frontier Exploratory Corps. Assigned to the Avalon for a routine survey mission on Borealis." Sorensen tapped a datapad. "Records confirm the Avalon was lost with all hands. Yet, here you are. Tell us the sequence of events leading to your survival over the next hour." Miles recounted the harrowing saga, the crash landing, the brutal cold, discovering Rhea, fighting off mechanical hunters, delving into the subterranean ruins, the rescue of the captive, and finally the collapse of the ancient city. He spared no detail, describing the technology, the carvings, the symbiosis of biology and machinery. Sorensen's eyes glinted with keen interest at mention of the mechanical overseer and the pods. He peppered Miles with questions about the machine's capabilities, the structural layout of the ruins, and any salvageable technology. The intelligence officer seemed less curious about the plight of the wolf-like natives than about the potential threat or benefit such an advanced but dormant system might pose to the Alliance. Captain Armitage, for her part, displayed genuine concern for the living survivors. "We'll forward your statements to High Command," she said when Miles finished. "Given the instability on Borealis, a full-scale expedition might be launched in the future, but for now, that planet is off limits. Even from orbit, we can see the cataclysms intensifying." Miles nodded, relief washing over him. He doubted that planet would be safe for any new expeditions. Still, the thought of further intrusion upon Rhea's homeland unsettled him. He glanced at her, offering a faint smile. Sorensen shut off the holo recorder. "Well, Mr. Vincent, that's all for now. You'll be temporarily reassigned to the Marathon until Command decides your next station. Your companions will undergo further medical tests, with their consent, of course." "She consents only if I'm there with her," Miles interjected, not caring if it sounded like a demand. "I won't let her be treated like a lab specimen." The intelligence officer's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll see what accommodations can be made. In the meantime, do not wander restricted areas, and do not share sensitive data about this incident without authorization." He gave a brief nod to Armitage, then left the lounge with purposeful strides. Armitage offered a sigh, rubbing her temples. "He's a bit intense, but rest assured, we'll treat your friends humanely. This ship isn't a prison. If Rhea wishes, she can move about freely, as long as she's escorted." Miles rose, offering a grateful smile. "Thank you, Captain. It means a lot." She turned to Rhea, her expression softening. "Welcome aboard. Rhea, I hope you'll come to see that not all technology is cruel." Though Rhea didn't grasp the words, she sensed the tone. Her ears perked, and she gave a tentative nod. With that, Armitage departed, leaving the lounge in relative silence. Miles and Rhea were left to process the new reality. They were safe for now, but a world of uncertainties stretched ahead. The Marathon would reach an Alliance spaceport in a few weeks, at which point their fate would be decided by powers far beyond them. Yet, as Rhea settled beside him, curling her tail around his leg in an unspoken gesture of trust. Miles knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever came next, they would face it together. Over the next several days, life aboard the Marathon settled into a routine. Miles spent much of his time with Rhea in the medical bay, where the staff gently examined her physiological structure. He acted as a bridge, soothing her nerves with calming gestures. As they gradually built a vocabulary of shared signs and words, she began to grasp the concept of doctor and healing. The captive, who Miles now called Archon, derived from one of the few syllables they vocalized, recovered steadily from their injuries. Without the caller's interference, their vital signs improved, and they tentatively interacted with the human nurses. Rhea's presence seemed to comfort them, as if a fragment of their lost world remained intact in these sterile corridors. Miles also noticed that, while Archon's fur was similar in texture to Rhea's, their facial features differed slightly, with a narrower snout and a distinct pattern of stripes. The xenobiologists posited that the wolf-like species on Borealis might have multiple ethnic or regional variations. Between medical exams, Miles tried to teach Rhea and Archon simple English words, pointing at objects around the ship. They were quick learners, though the harsh consonants of English seemed ill-suited to their throaty vocalizations. Nevertheless, progress came in small increments, each one a minor victory that brightened their new existence. One afternoon, as Miles guided Rhea through a corridor toward the observation deck, an unexpected voice stopped him in his tracks. Miles Vincent. "You old dog?" He turned to see a tall figure in a crisp uniform striding forward, grinning widely. Recognition flared Lieutenant Delgado, an old comrade from the academy days. "Delgado," Miles exclaimed, returning the grin. "What are you doing on the Marathon?" The lieutenant clapped him on the shoulder. "Assigned here a few months ago. Never thought I'd see you again after the Avalon vanished. Heard rumors someone got rescued off Borealis, but I had no idea it was you." Emotion surged in Miles's chest. Familiarity was a balm he didn't realize he craved. "It's a long story," he said, glancing at Rhea. "There were complications. But yeah, I made it, thanks to Rhea here." Delgado's gaze shifted to the tall, furred figure beside Miles. Though his eyebrows shot up, he quickly masked any surprise with a polite nod. "Greetings," he offered, voice tinged with curiosity. Rhea tilted her head, her gold eyes studying him before returning a cautious nod. Miles explained their bond, the rescue, and the situation on Borealis. Delgado listened intently, occasionally interjecting a question. "Incredible," he muttered when Miles finished. "You survived in that frozen hell for weeks, fought off killer robots, and made friends with the locals. You always did have a knack for chaos." He laughed, the sound echoing in the corridor. Miles chuckled too, though his mind drifted to the memories of pain and terror. "Yeah, well, I'd trade that knack for a hot meal and a normal assignment any day." Delgado's gaze softened. "Trust me, I get it. Look, I can't promise anything, but I might be able to smooth things over with command, help expedite the process, so that you and your new friends aren't stuck in bureaucratic limbo forever." Miles exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That would be amazing. Thank you," Delgado nodded. "Consider it done. Come on, let's get you to the observation deck. I hear the Marathon's heading out of the system soon. You'll want to see Borealis one last time." Together, they walked down the corridor, Rhea padding silently beside them. The tension Miles had been carrying since the crash seemed to ease a fraction at the sight of an old friend. He explained a bit about human customs to Rhea, indicating Delgado was an ally. She listened, occasionally repeating words, her ears flicking with concentration. They arrived at the observation deck, a large, domed area with transparent panels, offering a panoramic view of space. The distant star cast a pale glow over Borealis, now reduced to a swirling orb marred by fissures and flickers of orange magma where the planet's core vented through the ice. Rhea stared, transfixed by the sight of her home from high above. Miles placed a gentle hand on her arm. "That's Borealis," he said softly, "from orbit." She made a low humming sound, a tone of wonder and heartbreak. Archon, who had joined them with a nurse's assistance, let out a soft whine, pressing against Rhea's side. Delgado stood off to the side, quietly observing. Then he asked, "So, what's next for you three?" Miles sighed. "I don't know. The Corps might reassign me, or maybe I'll be forced to retire after the psych evaluations. As for Rhea and Archon, they deserve a place to call home, somewhere they won't be hunted." Delgado nodded. "The Alliance has xenoprotection laws. Once they're recognized as sentient beings, they'll have rights. There'll be a whole legal process. Sure, but at least they won't be treated like lab experiments." Relief coursed through Miles. He recalled his promise to protect Rhea. This was the first step, but a knot still twisted in his stomach. Even if the Alliance granted them rights, how would Rhea and Archon adapt to a society dominated by technology? Given the trauma they suffered on Borealis, he turned back to the window. The planet loomed large, a testament to both cruelty and resilience. Once, it had nearly claimed his life. Now, it was an ever-dwindling speck of memory, overshadowed by the endless cosmos. An officer's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a final orbit correction before jumping out of the system. The Marathon's engines hummed, and the planet began to shrink in the viewport. As they drifted away, Rhea let out a haunting, low howl, Archon joining in. The sound echoed in the observation deck. A farewell to the land they once knew, a final requiem for Borealis. Miles wrapped an arm around Rhea's shoulders, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. Borealis vanished from sight. In its place, the starfield stretched, infinite and indifferent. Miles closed his eyes, thinking of the glacial caverns, the mechanical hunters, the savage beauty of a world that had nearly killed him and had given him an unbreakable bond with two unlikely allies. The Marathon prepared for its faster-than-light transition, the stars outside twisting into streaks. A new chapter awaited them on the other side of that cosmic threshold, one filled with questions, challenges, and perhaps, if they were lucky, a hope that burned brighter than any star. Weeks passed in a blur of hyperspace travel, medical evaluations, and bureaucratic hurdles. Miles often felt like a bystander as committees, commanding officers, and xenobiologists debated Rhea and Archon's fate, though the Marathon's crew treated them kindly. The official processes of the Alliance sometimes seemed more formidable than the ice storms of Borealis. Eventually, they arrived at Novaria Station, a bustling hub orbiting a blue-green gas giant. Massive docking arms extended like mechanical limbs, accommodating ships of all sizes. Shuttles zipped between the station and a ring of orbital habitats, ferrying goods and personnel. Miles, Rhea, and Archon were ushered into a secure portion of the station, where specialized facilities existed to handle first contact scenarios. Though Rhea and Archon had begun learning a bit of English and responded to basic questions with gestures, the Alliance insisted on a thorough assessment to grant them recognized status as sapient aliens. For Miles, the day of their official hearing felt like a trial. Dressed in a formal uniform borrowed for the occasion, he entered a large, semicircular chamber adorned with flags of various Alliance worlds. A tribunal of admirals, xenologists, and legal representatives sat behind a curved desk, their expressions solemn. Archon stood nervously beside him, wearing a simple robe provided by the station's quartermaster. Rhea was on Miles's other side, ears twitching with tension. A hush fell over the room as the presiding officer, Admiral Kolstad, spoke. "We are gathered here to determine the status of the individuals known as Rhea and Archon, natives of the planet Borealis, as documented by pilot Miles Vincent," Kolstad said, his voice resonating in the chamber. "Additionally, we will evaluate Mr. Vincent's testimony regarding the events on Borealis and his proposal for the recognized autonomy of these beings." Miles stepped forward, heart hammering. He recounted, yet again, the story of Borealis, only this time. He spoke not just of survival, but of the intelligence, loyalty, and empathy Rhea and Archon had shown. He described their complex communication methods, their artistry, their capacity for sorrow and joy. Halfway through his testimony, Rhea surprised everyone by stepping forward as well. In halting English, she managed a few words. "We, same," she said, tapping her chest, then Miles's arm. "No, machine, no harm." Though her speech was disjointed, it carried a primal sincerity that hushed the tribunal to stunned silence. Archon remained silent, still more comfortable communicating through soft clicks and signs. But their presence was equally powerful, a living testament to the species' adaptability and suffering. A hush followed. Then Admiral Kolstad cleared his throat. These testimonies and demonstrations indicate that Rhea and Archon possess cognitive faculties and emotional range consistent with sapient beings. Unless there are objections. A xenobiologist to the left, Dr. Tsang, shook his head. No objections. Their neurological scans corroborate advanced cognitive function, including abstract reasoning and complex emotional responses. A mild murmur rippled through the chamber. Kolstad pressed on. "Very well. The next question is what legal status they shall hold within the Alliance. Mr. Vincent, you have requested that they be granted the rights and protections afforded to recognized sapient species, including asylum or potential citizenship. Is that correct?" Miles nodded, mouth dry. "Yes, that, sir. They've lost everything, and they risked their lives to save me. They deserve the chance to live without fear, to learn and grow among us, if they choose." Archon made a soft, low sound, perhaps a sign of agreement. Rhea placed a hand over Miles's, eyes shining with quiet gratitude. The tribunal conferred in hushed voices. Papers rustled, and digital tablets glowed with official documents. At length, Admiral Kolstad raised his hand for silence. "By the authority vested in this council, I formally recognize Rhea and Archon of Borealis as sapient entities entitled to full protective status under Alliance law, pending further evaluation." Miles's chest flooded with relief. Rhea and Archon exchanged a glance, sensing the room's shift in tone. They might not grasp every nuance of legal jargon, but they understood something momentous had occurred. Kolstad continued. "As for their ongoing care, living arrangements, and cultural integration, a specialized xenocultural liaison team will be assigned. Mr. Vincent, your role in their rescue and your bond with them is noted. You have the option to serve as a liaison as well, should you agree. Serve as a liaison. The proposition both excited and daunted Miles. He'd joined the Frontier Exploratory Corps to discover new worlds, never imagining he'd be responsible for helping an alien species acclimate to human society. Yet, how could he refuse the chance to remain by Rhea and Archon's side? He took a breath. "I'll do it, sir. I want to help them." Kolstad offered a solemn nod. Then it settled. "We'll arrange the necessary accommodations. This hearing is adjourned." A soft hum of conversation broke out as the tribunal members stood, collecting their files. Archon tugged on Miles's sleeve, looking confused. Rhea pressed close, as if seeking reassurance. Sensing their anxiety, he gently explained, using gestures and words, "You are safe now. They protect you. You can stay." Rhea's brow furrowed. Then her tense posture eased. She leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaling a long, shaky breath. Archon let out a slow rumble, eyes fluttering with relief. They might not grasp the full magnitude of Alliance bureaucracy, but they understood kindness and refuge. Captain Armitage, who had attended the hearing, approached with a warm smile. "Congratulations, all of you. It's a rare thing to see such an outcome without months of red tape. Seems your testimony struck a chord." Miles smiled back, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Thank you, Captain. I can't believe it's actually happening." She nodded at Rhea and Archon. "Take them to the Xenocultural Center on Deck 12. They'll have living quarters there, specially designed for non-human physiology. And Miles gets some rest too. You look exhausted." Exhausted. Yes, but also unburdened. The weight of uncertainty, of knowing Rhea and Archon might be torn from him, had lifted. He guided them out of the chamber, stepping into the station's bright corridors with a renewed sense of purpose. As they walked, hand in claw, they passed curious onlookers who stared but didn't interfere. Rhea's ears twitched at every new sight and sound, and Archon occasionally paused to sniff the air or examine a holographic display. In that moment, Miles realized they were forging a future together, bridging two worlds with every cautious step, and for the first time since crash landing on Borealis, the horizon felt open, vast, and filled with possibility. Months later, Miles found himself in a place he never expected, a modest apartment on Novaria Station, decorated with a mix of human comforts and alien touches. The walls displayed swirling patterns of painted ice crystals, Rhea's attempt to recreate a fragment of Borealis's beauty using local art supplies. Soft rugs lined the floor, offering warmth underfoot. Shelves held a small but growing library of xenobiology texts, children's language guides, and a handful of Earth classics. He sipped a hot mug of spiced tea, the aroma soothing. Across the room, Rhea sat at a low table, carefully tracing English letters in a workbook. She had made remarkable progress, able to speak simple phrases like, "Hello, how are you?" and "I want to learn." Archon, quieter by nature, focused on nonverbal communication. Though they had picked up enough words to navigate daily routines, the door hissed open, and Delgado stepped in, beaming as always. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Brought some supplies from the station marketplace." Miles grinned, waving him inside. "No interruption. You're always welcome." Rhea glanced up, offering a friendly nod. Archon chuffed softly. Delgado placed a box on the table. Inside were fresh produce, assorted station-grown vegetables, and a few treats like chocolate bars. Rhea perked up at the sight of chocolate, having developed a mild obsession with its sweet taste. "Choco?" she asked, eyes bright with anticipation. Delgado chuckled. "Yes, Rhea, Choco." He handed her a small bar, and she nibbled it with delight. Archon, curious, tried a piece but seemed less impressed, preferring the savory station vegetables. "How's life in the liaison program?" Delgado asked, sinking into a chair. "Rumor has it you're writing a formal paper on Borealis's ecosystem." Miles nodded. "Yeah, between Rhea's and Archon's insights and my own scans, I've pieced together a decent overview of how life might have evolved under those extreme conditions before the mechanical incursion. Of course." Delgado's gaze flicked to Rhea. "And how are the lessons in cultural assimilation going?" Rhea set down her chocolate, meeting his eyes. "In careful English," she replied. "We learn many new things. Strange, but good." She smiled, revealing sharp canine teeth, though once menacing. That smile had become a comforting sight to Miles. Delgado looked suitably impressed. "Your pronunciation's improving." Rhea, she flicked her ears in thanks, a habit she had picked up to indicate gratitude. "We want to see more," she added, glancing at Miles as if for approval. "Not just station, planets, sun, freedoms." Miles swallowed a lump in his throat. He recalled how caged they had felt beneath the ice, hunted by machines. Now, even living on Novaria Station, they were relatively confined, dependent on the liaison program for housing and support. "We'll make it happen," he promised. One step at a time, Delgado shifted in his seat. "Actually, there might be a way to expedite that. I've been talking to Captain Armitage. The Marathon's heading out on a new patrol route soon, passing through some of the core worlds. We could request a passenger berth for you three, let you see more of Alliance space. Maybe find a planet that suits you." Miles perked up, hope flickering. "Seriously?" Delgado nodded. "Yeah, I've got some pull with the scheduling department. It's not guaranteed, but we can try." Rhea cocked her head. "Travel, like ship." She mimed a flying motion. "Exactly. Travel in the big ship. You want that, right?" She glanced at Archon, who blinked in cautious interest. Then she turned to Miles, muzzle creasing in a grin. "Yes, see new worlds, safe worlds, Miles felt warmth flood his chest. This was exactly what they needed, the chance to explore, to find a place they truly could call home. Borealis was a frozen tomb of memories and mechanical nightmares. Novaria Station was a good start, but it wasn't meant to be a permanent dwelling for them. The galaxy was vast, and somewhere among the stars, Rhea and Archon could find the peace they deserved. "We'll make the arrangements," Delgado said, tapping his data tablet. "In the meantime, keep up the language lessons. The more you two can communicate, the easier it'll be to navigate the Alliance. Bureaucracy's no joke." They all shared a laugh. Miles set a comforting hand on Rhea's shoulder. Her fur felt warm against his palm, a far cry from the sub-zero nights on Borealis. Memories of those desperate days still haunted him. But now they were tempered by the knowledge that they had forged something precious from the adversity, a bond that transcended species, cultures, and star systems. Archon's ears twitched. "We go soon?" they asked, each word carefully enunciated. Miles nodded, giving Archon an encouraging smile. "We go soon, together." As Delgado rose to leave, Miles walked him to the door, outside. The station's corridors bustled with diverse races, from scaled reptilians to floating cephalopods. The Alliance was no perfect utopia, but it was a tapestry of possibilities. If Rhea and Archon could fit in anywhere, it was here. Watching Delgado disappear into the crowd, Miles allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had come a long way since the day he'd crash-landed on Borealis. Surviving the ice world had been just the beginning. Now they were forging a life imperfect, but filled with hope beneath the glow of stars, rather than the harsh glare of a perpetual twilight. Returning inside, he closed the door behind him. Rhea and Archon both looked up, curiosity and anticipation shining in their eyes. He smiled. "Pack your things," he teased, though neither owned much. "We've got a galaxy to explore."